Congressman Russell Fry, representing the 7th Congressional District in South Carolina, is our guest. You know, it really has to be tough being a member of Congress, given that the GOP has such a fragile majority, and you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have Thomas Massey, and then you go back, Kevin McCarthy's ouster. What is it like when they're vying for your vote, vying for your support, and you have to choose between principle and political expediency?
I think the big thing is that it is a very narrow majority. I think not since for the last 100 years have you seen, or ever have you seen, such a small majority. And we've had people that have left their positions for health reasons or family situations. And so that lead that we had, that 10-vote margin lead or so, has now shrunk to about 2. And so every vote counts. If you get COVID, if you break your thumb, if your dog dies. I mean, these are all things that impact what happens on the floor. And so it's really important that you show up, that you're there in the chair, and that you cast your vote.
You didn't answer my question.
Well, I am guided on principle, period. And so when either leadership or whomever is working a particular bill talks to me, I'm very attuned to what the district wants and what they're saying to us when they call, when they write to us. And so we let that dictate really how we operate within the Congress.
How do you feel about your speaker?
I think he's doing his best job as he can with a 2-vote majority. I think Mike Johnson's a principled guy. He was my subcommittee chairman prior to him becoming Speaker of the House. But I don't know anybody in any good faith that would look at that and go, I could do a better job. It's just a tough job. And you've got, if the bill's too conservative, you lose the moderates. If the bill's too moderate, you lose the conservatives. And so navigating that terrain is very difficult when you've got 435 individuals in the House of Representatives and you're trying to marshal an issue forward to the floor.
How important is the vote on the funding to Ukraine important to your constituency?
Well, my constituents don't want it, and they want audits done. They want accountability. If you look at a Time magazine article that was recently published, there was a moment in which the reporter was supposed to pull down the recording device, and the guy that he was interviewing from Ukraine said there's theft going on everywhere. And so that's the feeling from a lot of people, is that we're a very generous nation, but they want our own border secure right now, and they look at what's going on in Ukraine as just an endless war without any objective that we can achieve. What is the objective from this administration? We're not hearing it right now.
So what about the argument from the leadership, Speaker Johnson, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, that we need to support Ukraine because Russia is a growing threat?
I would say, look, I think everybody collectively, including those on my side of this issue, would say that Russia invaded a sovereign country. That's a problem. But when it comes to U.S. Treasury that's supportive of the Ukrainian people, we want to know that the dollars are being spent wisely, that they're not being pocketed into generals or into the leadership of the Ukraine government. We want to know that the money is going to weapons and not pension systems. And we want to make sure that there is a strategic objective that we can achieve. What is that? We don't know. Is that the return of Crimea, for example, back to Ukraine that's been in the hands of Russia since 2014? Is that the Donbass region too? What does a strategic objective or victory look like? We still don't know from this administration. And I think at some level, every American wants some level of accountability from this administration, from this president, about what that looks like. And without it, you're going to have a lot of people, myself included, that are not going to be with you on appropriating billions of dollars to a foreign country when we've got our own problems here at home.
So based on what you just said, how do you also make the opposite argument to support Netanyahu in his campaign in Gaza and not Rafah at almost any cost? What's the difference?
Well, very, very big difference. There are two different theaters, right? Israel is a stable government. They've been an ally of ours for a very long time. Ukraine isn't in NATO. They're not part of NATO. They have not strategically been an ally of ours for any number of years. It's very different theaters when you look at this. What is going on in Israel is that we have American citizens that are there that are dual citizens. You have the worst terrorist attack that they've ever had in October 7th. And our support for Israel, we support them, they support us. They provide us intelligence on the ground of what is happening with some of our adversaries like Iran, like Hezbollah in the north of Israel, certainly with Hamas in the Palestinian zones. And so there is a very different, it's a very different world when you compare, it's apples to oranges when you compare to Ukraine to Russia or to Israel.
Are there any limits to your support for Israel?
I think right now, my vote just a couple weeks ago on this was they need weapons to replenish their defensive capabilities. They also need to eliminate Hamas, which is, you know, they are considered by Hamas and by Hezbollah and by Iran to be little Satan, and we are considered by them to be the big Satan. And so they provide such a check in that region against these very dangerous fringe terrorist elements. And so for the longest time, for any number of years, they have stood with us, and we are going to stand with them.
You know, someone said that the Holocaust could never happen again. And one of my most popular monologues over the last couple of weeks, I asked this question. If you want to know how the Holocaust happened and how it can happen again, watch these anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hatred protesters, these agitators, and no adult correct them and challenge them when they cross the line with hate speech and violence. And then you can clearly understand how the Holocaust can happen again.
You look at, you know, I just visited Israel about a month ago or so, and we went to the Holocaust Museum there. And one of the things in the lead up of the Nazi takeover of Germany were little things that would be embedded in German culture. Games for children that kind of castigated Jews as a different type of person, that dehumanized them as an actual people. And so little by little, it kind of swept the country. And the Nazis were able, in part, to take over because of that. And you had such this hatred. I'm seeing very similar themes, certainly in Hamas and what is going on in Palestine. But it is deeply troubling to me that you're seeing this on college campuses, that this is an area of learning, and you're seeing such a visceral reaction from some of these radical leftists about the state of Israel, just even the right to exist. And that's, for us, that's deeply concerning.
Where is the sympathy, the compassion for the innocent Palestinians that are just as disgusted with Hamas as the rest of the Arab world, but who are being used for human shields? They face the famine. They face the loss of infrastructure. They have no housing, no shelter. Where's the compassion for them?
I think there is compassion, but you also have to remember that 70% of Palestinians right now support what happened to Israel from Hamas on October 7th. The 70%.
What do you base that figure on?
Some polling that recently came out about, you know, where they are. And the question that I have is,
how do you know it's not propaganda?
Well, I take sources at their word. It's not just, you know, internet meme that I saw.
But, you know, there's a lot of propaganda
Correct.
There on both sides.
But I do think that they have the capability, and again, I think it's deplorable that they would use people as shields. I mean, their headquarters were in a hospital, and so when there was a hospital that was attacked, you saw all the propaganda from Hamas come out. They're attacking a hospital. There are people here. There was nobody there except Hamas. They had emptied out. And any aid, a lot of aid that has gone into Palestine, into Gaza, has been taken for Hamas. And so they benefit themselves. They pull on the heartstrings of the world community, and then they prop up their regime. Instead of building schools, they're building tunnels to attack Israel. And we've seen that. We've seen the reports of that. And there's efforts and capabilities made right now to make sure that stops. And so ultimately, the Palestinian people are going to have to reject this idea that this terror group can continue to govern their country.
Congressman Russell Fry is our guest. For those of you just joining us, he represents the 7th Congressional District of South Carolina. The United Nations just had a vote recently to admit the Palestinians to the UN. We're talking about people who participated with Hamas on October 7th, who've used the money to finance more attacks on Israel. The United States absolutely voted against it. What are your thoughts on the United Nations? It seems to give comfort to terrorist organizations.
Well, you look at, and great question, Armstrong, you look at UNRWA as an example. They are a UN organization or entity that is supposed to be providing relief to the Palestinian people, but they have been recently tied to Hamas at giving aid, giving resources to Hamas themselves. And so the UN right now on this particular issue is not functioning as it should. And that's deeply concerning to me because we have long supported the UN and the international community, but it seems like the very entities that should be kind of keeping the peace are not. The very entities that should be stifling out hate and rejecting radicalism are not actually doing that. They're funding it.
Congressman Russell Fry is our guest. This is Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your moderator, and we'll be back. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States hundreds of years ago, he said America was 50 years more advanced than any other place on the planet. He said it had to do with its churches and the best educational system in the world. But today, kids are not learning about civics, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. They talk about DEI and transgenderism, which has really nothing to do with a solid education of reading, arithmetic, and writing. And it was clear from our founders, unless you had an educated society, you cannot sustain yourself. What do we do about that crisis in America?
Well, I think for starters, you've got to provide parental choices, more parental choices. In my district that I represent, there are very affluent areas that have fantastic public schools. But there are very poor areas that have absolutely terrible schools. And so if you're going to improve outcomes for students and families, private school is not affordable for the middle class. It's not affordable for the working class. And so if you provide some parental choices, states are really leading on this in a lot of ways, and that you empower parents to make decisions. That if the school is failing, why should we send our kids to that? That the zip code that you're born into should not predetermine the outcome of your education. I think that is a big step forward. States certainly are governing that. But I think the feds, in a lot of ways, can look, the more that you can decentralize education power in Washington, quite frankly, most things in Washington, and send it back to the states, let them do this. If the states borrow from each other all the time, great policy ideas. You look at Florida on their education system and how that's transformed by empowering parents. You look at Indiana, Arizona. These are states that are kind of a model in a way in providing those opportunities and those options to families.
You know, you have been involved with human trafficking legislation. It seems it's an issue that never goes away, the sexual trafficking. Are we making any progress?
I think so, but it's not enough. And as laws change, so do practices with these criminal enterprises that engage in this. When I was in the State House, my second year, I believe it was, we passed what an organization called the most advanced human trafficking bill in the country. We were the most improved state. But even on the federal level, it is there. It is right in front of our faces. It's in every community, whether you're in rural South Carolina or New York City. It doesn't matter. It exists. And so the key is educating the public so that they know what to see, educating judges so that when things come in front of their courtrooms, that they're able to spot it, but also enabling prosecutors to take down these trafficking rings. And the back end of this, too, you can't prosecute your way out of it entirely, but you have to make sure that you are sympathetic and that you're helpful to the victims on the back end. I think that if you could marry those two issues together, you're going to have a good piece of public policy.
I was reading an article this week by Mark Penn, who was a pollster to the Clintons, and he said that President Biden is in a very dangerous place in just all the battleground states. He's losing to former President Donald Trump. And he says the reason why is because he's so beholden to wokeness and to leftness. They have lost the identity of the Democratic Party in the process. And as a result, voters are just, there's a stampede away from the party. Your thoughts?
I agree completely. And I look at polling, certainly as you do. But I also listen to people in the district. And when I hear repeatedly from people who have never voted Republican, and they say that they just can't do it anymore. And they look at the state of the border. They look at the woke stuff that you referenced. They look at the economy and how it's not working for people. That people, the stock market might be doing well, but people don't feel like they're getting ahead because inflation is still so high. And so people are looking very vividly at where were we 3 years ago and where are we today? And you are seeing in a whole host of areas a complete reversal. And it scares people, it frightens them, and they want a little piece of some sanity and some change in their pockets like they had 3 or 4 years ago.
But why can't Congress come together on bipartisan legislation, which the president says he would sign, to stop the invasion across the U.S. borders?
Well, they had a Senate bill, which was purportedly an agreement, except the Senate bill funded Ukraine. It funded any number of other things other than the actual border. And I always go back to this. This is striking to me. Obama's former Homeland Security Secretary said that if you have 1,000 migrants that cross the border a day, that is a crisis. We're at 10,000 a day right now. And within the language of the bill, it says, well, at 5,000 migrants a day, we'll shut down the border. Well, why would we not shut down the border today? Why would we not shut it down at 1,000? You're telling me that I have to compromise at 5,000, which is 500% more than what the former Obama Homeland Security Secretary said was crisis? I think it was unconscionable that we would even propose that. It wasn't a good bill. It actually tied the hands of our law enforcement agents and never actually fixed the problem. Let's actually fix the problem, and you can do that. One, President Biden can do that today by reversing course on the removal of Trump's executive actions. Or, and likewise, the Senate can also pass H.R. 2, which if you ask the professionals on the ground, will actually secure the border.
You know, you were one of those that voted to impeach Alexandra Mayorkas. But let's just say, if you're correct, the problem is not Mayorkas, it's the president. His cabinet secretary is doing exactly what the president expects. So what would you have accomplished had he been impeached?
Well, I think it sends a very big message. And this issue to me, and you can look at polling on this, is not partisan until you cross the Potomac here in Washington, D.C. American people see this for what it is, and they're tired of it. And so the buck stops at the secretary. Certainly he was part of a larger game plan here on who's making decisions, but he is also making decisions. He's also not telling the truth to Congress. And if you look at the impeachment articles against him, it's both the conduct in front of Congress and not him not being truthful, but also his record on the border, which has been an absolute and unmitigated disaster.
You know, it has to be challenging. We talked about this earlier, being a member of Congress, but you don't strike me as someone who's newly minted in Congress, up for re-election, have any intentions of retiring because you're so disgusted with the place that you want to do something else. Why? What separates you?
Well, one, I just got here, but I still believe that America's days are still ahead and that we have such an opportunity that every generation has given this country off better than they found it. And while there's a lot of very big problems that we face as a country, we still have that same opportunity for the next generation. And that fuels my passion up here. Even when it's a very tough day, even when you're frustrated by the process, which we all are, your viewers are frustrated by the process sometimes, and so are we. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this country is better for my child and my grandchildren, that they inherit the freest and most prosperous country, that we live up to our promises. We referenced Alex de Tocqueville earlier and the things that he talked about, the glory of America. Let's live up to that promise for the next generation.
You know, for the last couple of weekends, I have been in South Carolina, and I know you're on the House Judiciary Committee, and listening to the news and the number of people being killed, shootings, stabbings, you would think that you're in a major city. You would not think that that kind of crime and homicide had made itself into the deep red states. What's happening in our rural areas in this country?
Well, I think you're seeing certainly a challenge of local law enforcement and a funding problem with local law enforcement, that they need better resources. And it's not just unique to South Carolina, it really is everywhere. And people don't feel safe in their communities. And so it is always important. We're here on Police Week right now. It's important that you back the blue, not only that you stand with them and make sure that you are with them, but you also back that up. And those are done in a lot of ways at the local and state level. But however we can be helpful up here too, with our federal partners, we need to do that. And it's not an easy job. People don't sign up to be an officer because they're going to be wealthy one day. They do it out of love for their community and their state and their country. We've got to make sure that we do a better job of not only backing them publicly when they're under the microscope, but that we back it up with funding and help and the things that they need.
You know, one of the fascinating things in your background was the safeguards with the NCAA and the fact that they may come back from something that happened 5 years ago and seek payment for athletes that should have been paid. Why is this such a critical issue to sports?
Well, you know, college students, I think the NCAA got it wrong years ago when they said college students can't make any money. Well, I'm sorry, if you're 18 and you can vote and you can buy a lottery ticket and you can sign up to serve your country in the military, you should also be able to market your skill. And people should pay for that if they want to. And so they got it wrong. But now the pendulum has swung the other way, and it's just the Wild West. You're going to have, ESPN 30 on 30 stories down the road that talk about how a family was taken advantage of. There's just no guardrails in place. And you have these endless lawsuits. Whether a student is an employee of a university, that's a pending lawsuit. Whether they're allowed to unionize, that's another pending lawsuit. And so every time the NCAA tries to correct course based on what the Supreme Court has said, they're sued. And so I think you need the ability of oxygen to enter the space right now and allow the parties to discuss this, the universities, the players, the families, the NCAA and the conferences. But when you have these lawsuits, you're looking at billions and billions of dollars against university athletic departments. And what that's going to do is dry up college sports, maybe not the football program, but the wrestling program, the swimming program, the track and field programs. These things are going to go away because they no longer have the funding because of all the labyrinth or the litany of lawsuits that exist out there.
Now, another fascinating conversation is, the state of South Carolina has open carry now, but law enforcement believes it has its drawbacks. It could also weaken their ability to do their job and also threaten them as a result of this law. And I am a strong card-carrying Second Amendment guy. But sometimes do we go too far without really thinking this through?
Well, I don't think so. On open carry, you look at, for instance, Vermont, right? Vermont is not a Republican state, but they've had open carry for a very long time. You have other states, that have this. We're not alone in this. A lot of states have gone to open carry. I just look at the guardrails within the Constitution. Is that the Second Amendment is there for a reason. You look at the case law. You look at the reason it even exists within our constitutional framework, and it's to protect the people, their right to feel secure, but particularly against their own government if the need arose. And you've got here, shall not be infringed. I think that is unequivocal that states can govern here, and obviously and they have done so. I don't think you're seeing, I think there was a lot of concern when I was in the legislature about open carry that we heard from law enforcement, but I'm not seeing that being backed up right now, at least with the data itself. In other states that have led on this, that have gone to this, I think off the top of my head, maybe over 30 states, I don't think that it's the bad outcome that people believe that it was.
Finally, I think what people often don't realize is that when you come to Congress as a freshman, you're in class until you learn the rules, the guidelines, and it's very intense.
Yeah, it is. I'm actually blessed to be the president of the freshman class. I think for South Carolina, that's a great thing. I think not since Jim DeMint have we had somebody, but for me, we try to put together things that make us better members. What is the budget process like? What are the rules around ethics? What are some things that are coming up with the Farm Bill? So we do these, I would say, seminars where we bring in experts, where we bring in committee chairmen to really make sure that however you vote, that at least you're educated when you do it, that you know how things work a little bit, and that you're making the most informed choice that you can as a member of Congress.
Congressman Russell Fry, it's been an honor for me to have a fellow South Carolinian on the broadcast. My brother, State Senator Kent Williams, thinks highly of you. He said you're such a wonderful legislator, such a man of character and integrity, and you love serving. And so it was a pleasure having you on. We wish you well, and we hope to have you back. Much more on Your Voice, Your Future, when we return.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Joining the broadcast now is Leonard Snipes Jr., crime media relations expert, author, and Sal Greco, 14-year veteran with the NYPD. Sal, we cannot get into this about crime, the statistics, and what's going on in this country with juvenile delinquency without asking you about what did we learn from Michael Cohen's first day of testimony?
Oh, boy. I think he not only perjured himself, and he's going to probably face those repercussions from Congress for that whole incident he had in Congress, but today, I mean, he totally did he not give some attorney-client privilege a phone call? I mean, he was taping his client. Isn't that unethical, Armstrong? I think if he wasn't sanctioned and disbarred before, that in itself would be a motion to dismiss, right? I mean, he is an attorney. He was Trump's attorney. How do you allow that to stand in a courtroom? I don't get it. I think what Alvin Bragg's doing, Armstrong, is very unethical in itself. I mean, the judge already reprimanded him this morning. So I kind of feel like the tide is turning where the rule of law will come into play at some point in this trial, Armstrong.
Leonard, Trump has been adamant that the judge It's all rigged against him. The judge is biased. He railed against the judge today. Your thoughts?
Armstrong, it's politics, and I'm not quite sure that Donald Trump is being smart about the politics of being in court. You just don't want to tick off the judge who's about to make decisions as to what evidence is allowed and what evidence is not allowed. So I'm not particularly fond of what Trump is doing, and I think he's giving his lawyers quite a bit of consternation. I'd love to be a fly on a wall in the discussion between himself and his lawyers. So the former president, needs to be pretty careful in terms of how he addresses this, and I hope that he does not kill his own chances.
In your book, Success with the Media, Leonard, you discuss various aspects of how media influences public opinion and policy. How can media be used effectively to support and cover the violence, the crime, instead of always spinning it depending on whether it's the GOP or the Democrats? How can the media be more effective?
It can be more effective when they start being honest. Right now, we have a 44% increase for the United States Department of Justice in violent crime per their last report. That report from the U.S. Department of Justice is getting no play whatsoever. 8 out of 10 Americans believe, per Pew, that politicians don't listen to them and their concerns. I would imagine the same statistics would apply to the media. When you have a 44% increase in violent crime, and yet when I talk to reporters and when they talk to me, and I try to guide reporters all the time, when I mention the 44%, they're shocked. They've never encountered this statistic before. This is the latest data out of the U.S. Department of Justice. You were talking about juvenile crime a little while ago. Juvenile crime, through a new U.S. Department of Justice report released just last week, the amount of juvenile crime and the amount of people being victimized as juveniles has skyrocketed. So we have a crime problem in the United States. Somehow, some way, the media has to start being honest in terms of explaining crime and what's going on and what's happening throughout the country. So that's my suggestion to the media is to start reading the data from the U.S. Department of Justice.
From your extensive experience with the NYPD, Sal, what community programs have you seen to be the most effective in preventing juvenile crime, and how can these be expanded or improved?
There's a lot of programs. I believe when I was there, we had a lot of this community outreach, and so community outreach would have these programs where the community affairs officers would come to the schools, or they had these after-school programs. So I don't know how much money Eric Adams has allocated this into the budget in the future, because some of this money that they had in these programs was from the Bill de Blasio era, and Bill de Blasio used the money from the COVID funds. So this is something that might not be 100% Eric Adams' problem, even though he has a lot of problems. But in my day, we had that community outreach. We have these after-school programs. You also had the community, almost like they had these precinct events. We had the children come by. There's an Explorer program where the children actually come to the precinct, and it's kind of like they're a civilian for the day or for the week. So they interact with all the police officers in the precinct and also in the community. To go up to the people in the community with the police officers. So these are nice programs that'll get children involved and keep them away from, let's say, what's going on in the corner, or in certain shady parts of the area where there's the gang members there, or the teenagers that are involved in some kind of crime, or we're trying to turn a new leaf, so to speak. So that's how I was involved in that one back in my day. I don't know if they still have this, but I believe these programs do still exist as of today.
Given your different backgrounds, Leonard, how do you perceive the role of family and community support in combating juvenile delinquency, and what are some practical steps that can be taken to enhance the support?
Armstrong, I'm glad you asked me that question, because it's a issue that's near and dear to my heart. I've sat down and spoke to hundreds of criminal offenders about their backgrounds, and the research bears this out. That I'm not making excuses. I mean, different people say, Leonard, you're making excuses for bad behavior. I'm not. The overwhelming majority of people caught up in our criminal justice system have been beaten, have been abused, have been neglected. And we're talking about a significant number. One study said that 50% of the young people measured had brain injuries. The trauma of growing up in high crime neighborhoods, the trauma of crime and violence all around you, crime and violence in your own family. We have got to somehow, some way convince the American public that family needs to come first and that parents need to start taking responsibility for their kids. I mean, one of the most successful programs out of the U.S. Department of Justice's catalog of successful programs was sending nurses and social workers into the homes trying to teach parents how to be good parents. That was a remarkable reduction in recidivism. Parents don't know what to do with their kids. And in the process, these kids are being brutalized. The rate of women involved in the criminal justice system who have been sexually abused by somebody who they know when they were a minor is unbelievable. So, if we're going to have any shot at all at solving the crime problem, it's got to start with the family, and it's got to start with holding parents accountable for raising their own children.
So Sal, you really believe, as when Leonard is sort of indicating, that a lot of these kids have suffered a lot of trauma in their lives, and they're playing it out. And what is also fascinating about this, Sal, is that many of them don't believe they're going to live to be 24 years old. And it seems as though they relish and embrace death as if they have no idea what it is. The fact that if you commit suicide, if you go out in a blaze, you're not coming back here. I mean, their reality seems so misconstrued that it's almost frightening, Sal.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard does have a point, but we can't just look at the parenting. I mean, look in today's world, in our culture, Armstrong. What do they watch? It's what they're watching on TV. It's the social media not only has infected our children, it actually infected some of the upper echelon in these police departments who don't know if they're either celebrities, politicians, or wannabe musicians. Instead, you're just a police officer. You got to remember that. So the same would go for children. They very much mimic what they see. So if you're on television, they watch what's on TV. They watch what other, what's going on on social media. You also this video game thing where they all play video games and they want to be like Grand Theft Auto. Like, these things have an effect on a child's mind. And again, it goes back to parenting. But can you be 100% strict on your children? Can you be over them 24/7? I mean, parents work. Parents have, they have their own life. They do what they can for their children. But I mean, let's think about our everyday lives. Do we have all the time in the world to watch our kid 24/7? So these are things I would agree with Leonard on some issues, but I think it's a broader aspect. There's also social media and the culture we are living in today plays a big aspect on the young mind of a child.
But also, when you have prosecutors and state attorneys who are willing to not hold these teens accountable and responsible, and you can all of a sudden arrest them and put them back on the street within 24 hours, what does it do for the morale of law enforcement to do their jobs, knowing that they're fighting a system with prosecutors and state attorneys that really work against them doing their jobs? I mean, what is it like today, Sal, being a cop on the street and the morale of law enforcement all across the country?
I can tell you, Armstrong, from the law enforcement that I still speak to and that are still my friends, it's very frustrating to them right now. It seems that Alvin Bragg, who's the district attorney in Manhattan, the only person he wants to prosecute is the former president of the United States. Did you not see this weekend a bevy of crimes that were committed? An 11-year-old child was stabbed in the head by some maniac that was, you know what he was saying? He's just going to be coming right back out of prison. He knows the revolving door. We saw a woman brutally lassoed by this animal and then brought in
I saw
between a
it.
vehicle.
I saw
She
it.
was raped. She was
saw it.
raped, Armstrong. I mean, what are they doing? Darcel Clark is the district attorney of the Bronx. We want to see her, what she's going to do with that case. And what's Alvin Bragg doing about this woman that got stabbed in the head? She's an 11-year-old child. And there's a litany. I mean, Steve Buscemi, Armstrong, he's a big liberal progressive Democrat. He got punched in the face last week just randomly. Do you have random emotionally disturbed people randomly attacking people in the street, predominantly women, just getting punched in the face? And as much as we want to blame Eric Adams, and listen, Eric Adams, you could blame a lot of stuff on him. He is far from being, he says he's ordained by God to be the mayor. That's laughable. But Alvin Bragg and the district attorney and the city council and the legislation of New York State have about 75% of that blame, because the rules and the laws that they have applied with all this discovery and the bail reform, this is why the crime is through the roof in New York City. So no matter what you try to do to put a patchwork on something, Armstrong, it's just going to continue until these legislative bodies come together and say enough is enough. But really, Armstrong, who are we voting for in New York State? Are you going to keep voting one way? Because that's just not working, Armstrong. It really isn't.
And we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Leonard, I know you want to comment on what Sal was saying before we went out to break about law enforcement and legislatures across the country have become the enablers of this crisis that we're facing.
I think that law enforcement has been shackled by the sheer manpower crisis we have in this country. The U.S. Department of Justice has said it's a crisis. Two agencies now have said the lack of police officers is a crisis. You had police officers basically by the tens of thousands who have left the job. They're disgusted that, we have a problem in some areas of law enforcement where some cops did stupid and illegal stuff. But that does not mean that the 1 million+ police employees in this country, each and every one of them, that there's something inherently wrong with them. Law enforcement is an extremely noble profession. I've spent 6 years in law enforcement. We don't have enough police officers, and police officers that I talk to on a daily basis via social media, they're just saying that nobody's taking it seriously. Why arrest? Why try to go after this person when the prosecution won't bring this person into court? So we have a real problem in terms of law enforcement in the United States. Look, society's got to realize that they have a responsibility towards their own crime problem. Society needs to have a support for law enforcement. And nobody is saying that law enforcement is not subject to scrutiny on the part of the media or scrutiny on the part of the local, of the overall society. But we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've got to understand that the overwhelming majority of cops in this country are good, decent men and women who simply want to go home at the end of the night safe and sound. So society needs to change its viewpoint towards law enforcement. Society needs to change its viewpoint towards crime.
Bennett, juvenile court is not what it once were, and nor probably will it ever be, but it does seem that governors across the states are really signaling a new message. You have a Democratic governor in Maryland, Wes Moore, who made it clear to his legislature that we're going to pass juvenile justice reform, and you may kick yourself and start screaming, but there's just no way that you're going to believe that all these juveniles can be saved. No juvenile is the same. And so sometimes when a 13 and a 14 commit a murder, they must be tried in adult court. They must be held accountable for petty thefts like carjacking, car theft, and this criminal behavior, because this may start out small, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, especially when you don't hold them accountable. So we are seeing some signs, like in Maryland, that even Democratic governors, and even here in the District of Columbia, Mayor Muriel Bowser forced passage of a tough juvenile crime law here in the District of Columbia. So we are seeing some signs.
Per the rate of juveniles are being blasted. It's amazing. The last report from the U.S. Department of Justice, which was last week, huge increases in juvenile crime, huge increases in juvenile victimization. And we're talking about saving kids, and everybody wants to save kids. People do not understand what's going on out there per the U.S. Department of Justice in terms of the rate of violence directed at juvenile victims by juvenile offenders. I mean, you mentioned at the age of 25 that they don't believe that they're going to live beyond the age of 25. That was my experience. I sat down with 200 juveniles in the Baltimore City Jail for a crime summit, talking about their crimes, who they are, what their feelings are in life. And to a person, they believed that they were not going to live past the age of 25. So who cares? In their minds, they can do whatever they want to do. If the prosecutors are not going to prosecute them, and if their life is surrounded by violence, the only solution in their mind is to be violent. That violence is good. One person stood up and said, Mr. Sipes, you don't get it. Violence is a wonderful thing. It keeps me safe. It keeps my family safe. Being the craziest, most violent person, they know, I know, keeps my mother safe, my car safe, my property safe. That's the kind of world that we're living in today, and people need to start taking this seriously. Our politicians start needing to take this seriously, and prosecutors need to start prosecuting adult crimes. Very serious violent crimes need to go to adult court, not juvenile court.
No, Sal, why is it that gangs are rarely discussed now? We know that gangs knows how to exploit the laws to use these young kids who won't spend much time paying any kind of accountability for their crimes. I mean, a lot of these kids are brainwashed, they're indoctrinated. Many of them don't have fathers in the household. They're looking for a place of belonging, and they think what they find in these groups and these gangs is a source of love and something to fulfill them, and they're just tools for criminal enterprise.
More like a tool for manipulation. Because what the problem is, once again, it's the culture, what you see out there. They see social media, and everybody idolize. And the other problem is society has idolized people like Sammy the Bull Gravano. He's a murderer. Why do you idolize this guy? I know he did 20 years in prison, but why do children idolize him? They keep throwing him out there. He's got his own YouTube. He's on television. So what they're saying, it's okay to go to jail and be a murderer and then get out 20 years later and everybody be like this guy. I mean, that was a big, I grew up in Benson or Armstrong, and a lot of Italians growing up idolized him. And I don't get it. Do you want to grow up to be Sammy the Bull Gravano? See, that's one aspect of how the gangs are. Because remember, he was in the mafia. The other aspect now, Armstrong, is you have a wave of violent migrant gangs coming here. These people are from a whole nother country, and they're on a whole nother level. So now they're rivaling the inner city gangs that you've known about for years, and now comes a whole new wave coming in. They have no rules. They really don't care about the rule book because they're from another country, and they don't care if they get caught or they don't get caught. So that is a whole new spin on the whole gang violence thing, because now there's a migrant gang influx in this country.
So you actually believe that they are a threat, and you also have seen the reports where they're trying to register them to vote in this election season.
Yes. Well, you know what? A lot like New York City. See, here's a problem. Eric Adams always talks out of both sides of his mouth. So on one retrospect, he says, I don't want to approve the illegal immigrants voting for local elections. On the other hand, he's saying it's okay because city council keeps trying to push this bill through. So what they want to really do is those politicians want to stay in power. The easiest way is getting a new voting bloc. Because as you know, Armstrong, people that may vote today Democrat or liberal progressive, 5-10 years and now become, conservatives. Why? Because they see that what they believed in 10 years ago doesn't work 10 years later. Because everybody is, they change over time. So they just keep saying, we're going to keep bringing an influx of new voters and we'll just stay in power forever. So they want to legalize it so that illegal immigrants could vote. So this is a problem that I see. The Speaker of the House is trying to bring a bill where you need voter ID. That's a way to kind of try to stop the federal elections. But remember, local is key. I say this all the time. Local elections are what matters, and they're trying to take over the local elections forever. They'll stay in power forever if these people vote, because number one, they're not even citizens of this country, and two, there'll always be waves of new illegal immigrants in the country to vote for them.
Is there a model for fighting and doing this the right way, Leonard?
What we know from research is that proactive policing has the most successful track record. It would take a half an hour to explain this. We have tons of research, but we really don't have a lot of research in terms of what works. What works, based upon a huge literature review funded by the U.S. Department of Justice, is that proactive policing, police officers being somewhat aggressive, police officers getting out of their cars and doing stops. Proactive policing does reduce crime. There doesn't seem to be a lot of other data research in terms of other modalities. Now, there's nothing wrong with violence interrupters, as long as they're evaluated and as long as they're evaluated by somebody outside of the organization. But again, I'm not quite sure what a violence interrupter is going to do for a person who, as you all have said, believe that they're going to die by the age of 25. There's something wrong with our kids. So we do know from research that, as I said before, sending the nurses and the social workers in to deal with kids who are acting out at a very young age and teaching the parent, because in the vast majority of cases it's a single parent, how to parent, how to take care of their child, how to protect their child. That works. Proactive policing works. Everything else is basically, at this stage of the game, guesswork. There's nothing wrong with violence interrupters as long as it's evaluated properly.
I want to thank Congressman Russell Fry from the 7th District of South Carolina for joining us. Leonard, Snipes, it's always a pleasure to hear from you and share your changing statistics on crime. And Sal Greco, thank you for your insights, being a former NYPD officer and always making yourself available to join us. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams.